What the hell is this?
I was always invisible to him, just the silly assistant in glasses and awkward skirts. He never looked at me, never admired me, even after working for him for 3 years and being his best assistant. But today, that's about to end, and I'm going to tell you everything right now.
Welcome to my library. I'm Lena, and our story is just beginning.
Chapter 1. The Invisible Woman. 3 years working beside Adrian Murillo and I had perfected the art of being nothing, not invisible exactly, because he noticed me when he needed something, when a contract required my flawless preparation, or when a crisis demanded my silent efficiency. But I existed in his world the way oxygen exists, necessary but unremarkable, essential but never truly seen. I told myself I was fine with it because I was a professional, because I was there to work, not to be noticed, because wanting more than that was pathetic and desperate, and everything I refused to be. But the lie was getting harder to maintain with each passing day. Today it became impossible. The morning started like any other. Adrian in his massive corner office reviewing the merger documents I'd spent the entire night finalizing, because he needed them perfect by 9, and I never failed him, not once in 3 years. He didn't look up when I entered, just extended his hand in that automatic gesture that meant place it here, and I did, watching his jaw tighten as he read through the pages with that razor-sharp focus that made him one of the youngest CEOs in the industry. "Good work," he said, without lifting his eyes, and those 2 words should have felt like victory, but instead landed hollow in my chest. I turned to leave, my sensible low heels silent against his polished floor, when his voice stopped me. "Cancel today's lunch meeting and move it to Friday. Same restaurant, same time." "Of course," I replied, my voice steady and professional, the voice I'd cultivated specifically for him, never too loud, never too soft, never memorable. I was halfway to the door when Camilla from PR swept in without knocking, followed by 2 other women I recognized from marketing, all of them wearing confidence like expensive perfume and smiling at Adrian with the kind of familiarity I would never have. "Adrian," Camilla purred, leaning against his desk in a way that was deliberately casual and calculatedly seductive. "Please tell me you're coming to the pool party tonight." He leaned back in his leather chair, that subtle smile touching his lips, the one I rarely saw directed at me. "Depends. Is it worth my time? Open bar, beautiful people, and me in a swimsuit," she said with a laugh that sounded like wind chimes and entitlement. "I'd say that's worth it." The other women giggled, and Adrian's smile widened just slightly, and something sharp twisted in my stomach that I refused to name jealousy because that would mean admitting things I couldn't afford to admit. That's when Camilla's eyes landed on me, still standing there by the door like a piece of forgotten furniture, and her expression shifted into something that looked like pity, but felt like cruelty. "Oh, Estella's still here," she said, her tone bright and false. "Adrian, you should really let your assistant have a life outside this office. The poor thing is always here." The words hung in the air for a beat too long. Adrian's gaze flicked to me, assessing, and I saw it happen in real time. That split-second evaluation where he measured me against the women standing in his office, where I came up short in every way that mattered to him. "Mi Estella prefers to keep work and personal life separate," he said smoothly, turning back to Camilla. "She's not interested in company events. Prefers," as if he'd ever asked, as if he knew a single thing about what I wanted beyond how I took his coffee and which contractors he hated dealing with. Camilla's smile sharpened. "Right, of course. I forgot some people are just more serious about boundaries." The way she said it made boundaries sound like boring, made serious sound like pathetic. One of the other women, a blonde whose name I didn't care to remember, laughed softly and added, "It's actually kind of sad, though. 3 years here, and I don't think I've ever seen you at a single company function. Estella, don't you have friends? A boyfriend? Anything?" The question landed like a slap. Adrian's expression didn't change, didn't defend me, didn't tell them to shut up. He just sat there watching this small humiliation unfold with the detached interest of someone observing something that didn't really concern him. And that's when something inside me cracked wide open. "I have a life," I said, my voice coming out colder than I intended. "I just don't feel the need to perform it for an audience." Camilla's eyes widened slightly, surprised I'd spoken at all, but she recovered quickly with a pitying smile. "Of course you do, sweetie. I didn't mean anything by it." The "sweetie" was condescending enough to make my teeth clench. "It's just that Adrian surrounds himself with such vibrant people, and you're always so quiet. Background, you know? Background." The word echoed in my skull like a death sentence. I looked at Adrian then, really looked at him, waiting for him to say something, to correct her, to show even the smallest sign that I was more than just background in his life. But he was already turning back to the documents on his desk, dismissing the entire conversation as irrelevant. Stella, can you make sure those files are ready for the board meeting? He asked, his tone completely neutral, as if the last 2 minutes hadn't happened at all. Absolutely, I said, and walked out of that office with my spine straight, and my face blank, and my hands shaking with something that felt like rage and humiliation, and a desperate, horrible clarity. I sat at my desk outside his door, opened my laptop, and stared at the screen without seeing it, because all I could hear was Camilla's voice saying a background, and Adrian's silence confirming it. 3 years of making myself smaller, quieter, less, and for what? To be called poor thing and sweetie by women who saw me as no threat at all. To be so forgettable that my own boss couldn't even be bothered to defend me when someone insulted me to my face. The office door opened and the women filed out, still laughing about something, and Camilla paused at my desk with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. No hard feelings about earlier, right? She said, not waiting for an answer. You know I didn't mean anything bad. It's just that you could try a little harder, you know? Maybe if you dressed better or wore your hair down or just smiled more, people would actually notice you exist. She said it like she was doing me a favor, like this was helpful advice instead of a calculated strike designed to keep me in my place. I looked up at her, this beautiful, confident woman who had never had to work for Adrian's attention, who walked into rooms and commanded space without trying, and I felt something shift inside my chest, something cold and determined and done. Thanks for the advice, Camilla, I said evenly. I'll keep it in mind. She smiled like she'd won something and walked away, her heels clicking against the marble floor, and I sat there alone with the wreckage of my pride scattered around me. That night when I got home at 11, exhausted and hollow, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror and really saw myself for the first time in years. Plain clothes that hid my figure, hair pulled back so tight it gave me headaches. Minimal makeup that made me look washed out and tired. Every single choice designed to make me disappear, to make me safe, to make me nothing. And I thought about Camilla's words, about being background, about being the poor thing who didn't have a life. And I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to disappear anymore. Not for Adrian. Not for anyone. If I was going to be invisible, it would be by choice. Not because I'd made myself small enough to be overlooked. The woman in the mirror looked back at me with new eyes, and I barely recognized her. But I would. Soon, everyone would.
3 years being expensive office furniture in that man's office. I would have thrown hot coffee at him by month 2, but Estella is more patient than I am.
Chapter 2. Transformation. The change didn't happen overnight because I wasn't interested in dramatic reveals or shocking transformations. I was interested in becoming someone I actually recognized when I looked in the mirror. Someone who existed beyond the 4 walls of Adrian Murillo's executive office. It started small. I went shopping that weekend, alone. And for the first time in 3 years, I didn't choose clothes based on whether they would make me invisible in a corporate setting. I chose them because they made me feel powerful and beautiful and present. A black blazer that actually fit my body instead of hanging shapeless. Silk blouses in deep jewel tones that made my skin look alive. Pants that were tailored and elegant instead of deliberately unflattering. Heels, real ones, the kind that made me 3 inches taller and changed the way I walked through the world. I got my hair cut by someone who knew what they were doing. Layers that framed my face instead of that severe bun I'd been hiding behind. And when the stylist asked if I wanted to keep the length, I said no, cut it shorter, make it modern, make it mine. I learned how to do my makeup properly. Not the barely there neutral tones I'd been using, but something that enhanced what I already had. Defined eyes and bold lips, and the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you look good. But the real change, the one that mattered, happened inside. I stopped staying late every night just because Adrian might need something. I stopped answering emails at midnight and on weekends. I stopped organizing his entire existence and started organizing mine. Boundaries I should have established 3 years ago, finally being drawn in permanent ink. Monday morning, I walked into the office at exactly 9 a.m., not a minute earlier, wearing a fitted navy dress and heels that clicked with purpose against the marble lobby floor, and I felt every single person who had never noticed me before suddenly turn their heads. The security guard at the front desk did a double take. "Miss Vikagi, good morning, Marcus," I said with a smile that felt new and genuine. and he looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time, which maybe he was. The elevator ride up felt different. My reflection in the polished steel doors showing someone I was starting to recognize, someone who took up space instead of shrinking from it. Adrian's office floor was already buzzing with activity when I arrived, and I walked past the usual cluster of executives without my head down, without trying to be invisible, and the reactions were immediate and visceral. James from legal actually stopped mid-conversation to stare. 2 junior analysts I'd worked with for months looked at me with confusion and something like surprise. The receptionist, who had never bothered learning my name, called out, "Good morning," with sudden enthusiasm. I didn't acknowledge any of it, just walked to my desk, set down my bag, and started my computer with the same efficiency I'd always had, but now wrapped in a completely different package. Adrian's office door was closed, which meant he was either on a call or reviewing something that required absolute focus. So I had maybe 10 minutes before he emerged and noticed that his invisible assistant wasn't quite so invisible anymore. I used those minutes to check his schedule, confirm his afternoon meetings, and prepare the briefing documents he'd need for the day. The same tasks I'd done 1,000 times before, but my hands didn't shake, and my stomach didn't knot with anxiety about whether I was doing enough, being enough, I was enough, with or without his approval. The office door opened at 9:15 exactly, Adrian's internal clock as precise as ever, and I heard him before I saw him. That particular cadence of his footsteps that I'd memorized without meaning to over 3 years. "Estella, I need you to..." He stopped. Just stopped mid-sentence, mid-step, mid-thought, and I felt his stare like a physical weight, but I didn't look up from my computer screen. Didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing how much I wanted to know what he was thinking. "I need the Dawson contracts reviewed by noon," he finished, but his voice had changed slightly, a note of something I couldn't quite identify threading through the usual commanding tone. "Already done," I said, still not looking at him. "They're in your inbox. I found 3 clauses that needed revision and sent them back to legal this morning." Silence. I counted to 5 in my head, before finally lifting my eyes to meet his, and the expression on his face was worth every penny I'd spent on the new wardrobe, every minute I'd invested in this transformation. He looked confused, like someone had replaced his competent but unremarkable assistant with a stranger, and he was trying to reconcile the 2 versions in his mind and failing. "You cut your hair," he said, which was possibly the most inane observation he could have made. "I did," I confirmed, turning back to my screen. "Was there anything else you needed?" Adrian didn't move, didn't speak, and the silence stretched between us uncomfortably, until finally he cleared his throat and said, "No, that's all," before retreating back into his office, like I'd somehow wounded him by existing differently than he expected. I allowed myself a small smile. The morning continued with its usual rhythm of calls and meetings and crises that needed managing, but something fundamental had shifted in the way people interacted with me. Men held eye contact longer. Women included me in conversations instead of talking around me, and I realized with startling clarity how much of my previous invisibility had been self-imposed, how much I'd been complicit in my own erasure. Lunch came and I didn't eat at my desk like usual. Instead, I went out to a nearby cafe, sat in the sun, and read a book that had nothing to do with corporate law or merger acquisitions. And when I came back 45 minutes later, I found Adrian standing at my desk with an expression that looked almost annoyed. "Where were you?" he asked, and there was an edge to his voice that I'd never heard directed at me before. "A lunch?" I said simply, setting my bag down and meeting his eyes without flinching. "I'm entitled to a lunch break, aren't I?" Something flashed across his face. Anger, maybe, or surprise that I'd answered him like an equal instead of an employee scrambling to justify herself. "You usually eat here," he said, and it sounded almost like an accusation. "I usually did a lot of things," I replied, pulling up my email. "I'm trying something different now." He stared at me for another long moment, his jaw tight, and I could see him trying to figure out what had changed, what had triggered this shift, but I wasn't going to explain it to him because it wasn't his business. My transformation had nothing to do with him and everything to do with me. Finally deciding I deserved better than being background noise in my own life. "The Whitmore meeting is at 3, I said, when he didn't move. "I've prepared your notes and confirmed the conference room." "I know," he said, but he still didn't leave, just stood there looking at me like I was a puzzle he couldn't solve. And finally I looked up at him fully, letting him see the new confidence in my eyes, the subtle defiance. Is there something you need, Adrian?" My use of his first name without the usual deference seemed to snap him out of whatever trance he'd been in, and he straightened, his CEO mask sliding back into place. "No," he said curtly, "nothing." But as he walked away, I caught him glancing back at me once, twice, and I knew with absolute certainty that I had his attention now in a way I'd never had it before. The afternoon brought more of the same, colleagues who had ignored me for years suddenly finding reasons to stop by my desk, asking if I'd done something different, complimenting my outfit, my hair, my smile, and I accepted it all with grace while internally marveling at how shallow people could be, how much they valued appearance over substance. But I wasn't naive enough to reject the attention entirely, because the truth was that appearance mattered in this world, presentation mattered, and I'd been handicapping myself for 3 years by refusing to play the game. Now I was playing, and I was winning. Around 4 p.m., Camilla appeared, her usual entourage trailing behind her, and I braced myself for whatever cutting remark she had prepared. But when she saw me, her eyes widened with genuine shock before narrowing with something that looked like anger. "Estella," she said slowly, looking me up and down with barely concealed hostility, "you look different." "Thank you," I replied, smiling pleasantly, refusing to give her the discomfort she was fishing for. "I mean, it's quite a change," she continued, moving closer to my desk, her perfume overwhelming and expensive. "Did something happen? New boyfriend? Trying to impress someone?" The implication was clear. She thought I'd done this for Adrian, thought I was pathetically trying to get his attention through a makeover, and the assumption made my blood simmer with quiet fury. "I got tired of looking in the mirror and not recognizing myself," I said, meeting her eyes with unflinching directness. "So I changed what I didn't like. Simple as that." Camilla's smile turned sharp. "Well, it's certainly bold, though I hope you're not getting the wrong idea about your position here. A new dress doesn't change who you are fundamentally." "You're absolutely right," I agreed, leaning back in my chair with a confidence that was becoming more natural by the hour. "I'm still the same person who runs this office while everyone else is busy looking pretty at pool parties. The dress is just an upgrade to match the competence that was already there." One of the women with Camilla actually laughed before catching herself, and Camilla's face flushed with barely suppressed rage, because I'd just called her decorative to her face, without raising my voice or breaking my professional demeanor. "Careful, Estella," she said softly, dangerously. "Confidence is attractive, but arrogance is just sad." "I'll keep that in mind," I said, turning back to my computer in clear dismissal. "Now if you'll excuse me, some of us have actual work to do." She stood there for another few seconds, probably debating whether to escalate or retreat, and finally chose retreat, spinning on her designer heels and stalking away with her followers scrambling to keep up. And I felt a savage satisfaction that I'd held my ground, that I hadn't let her make me small again. Adrian's office door opened, and I knew without looking that he'd witnessed at least part of that exchange, could feel his eyes on me with an intensity that made my skin prickle with awareness. "Estella," he said, his voice low and controlled. "My office. Now." I took my time standing, smoothing my dress, gathering my tablet, and when I finally walked into his office, he was standing by the windows, hands in his pockets, shoulders tense. "Close the door," he said without turning around. I did, then waited, refusing to speak first, refusing to make this easy for him. He turned finally, and the look on his face was complicated, angry and confused, and something else I couldn't quite name, something that looked almost like hunger, but sharper, more dangerous. "What exactly is going on with you?" he asked, and his tone was meant to intimidate, but I was done being intimidated by Adrian Murillo. "I don't know what you mean," I replied calmly. "This," he gestured at me, at all of me, "this whole new look, new attitude, the way you talked to Camilla just now. What are you trying to prove?" "I'm not trying to prove anything," I said, meeting his stare without wavering. "I'm just done being invisible." The words hung between us, heavy with 3 years of unspoken resentment, and I watched something shift in his expression. Recognition, maybe, or guilt, or both. "You were never invisible," he said, but it sounded hollow even to my ears. "Wasn't I?" I challenged. "When was the last time you actually looked at me, Adrian? Really looked at me, not just at what I could do for you?" He opened his mouth, closed it, and I saw him realize he didn't have an answer, that he couldn't name a single time in 3 years when he'd seen me as anything other than an efficient tool for managing his life. "That's what I thought," I said quietly, and turned to leave his office, to leave him standing there with the weight of his own blindness. "Estella, unless you need something work-related," I said, without turning around, my hand on the door handle. "I have a lot to finish before I leave at 6. I walked out before he could respond, before I could see whatever expression was on his face, because I was done caring what Adrian Murillo thought of me. I was finally caring what I thought of myself, and that changed everything. Chapter 3. The Shift. The rest of the week unfolded like a chess game where I'd finally learned I had more pieces than just pawns. Adrian watched me, not the absent-minded glances he'd given me for 3 years, but real observation, the kind that made my skin warm and my pulse quicken even though I refused to acknowledge it, the kind that felt like he was trying to memorize something he was terrified of forgetting. I caught him staring during meetings when he thought I wasn't paying attention, his eyes lingering on the way I crossed my legs or tucked my hair behind my ear, small gestures that had always been invisible to him, suddenly becoming impossibly interesting now that they were wrapped in a different package. But I didn't give him anything. No smiles meant just for him, no lingering eye contact, No indication that his sudden attention meant anything to me at all, because the truth was, I'd spent 3 years wanting him to see me, and now that he finally was, I discovered I didn't particularly care anymore, or at least that's what I told myself. Wednesday brought the first real test of my resolve when Daniel Carver from the London office came for a week-long consultation on the European expansion, tall and charming with an accent that made every woman in a 10-foot radius suddenly need to adjust their hair. And he noticed me immediately in a way that felt both flattering and utterly natural. "You must be Estella," he said when Adrian introduced us, taking my hand and holding it just a fraction longer than professional. Adrian mentioned he has the best assistant in the industry, but he failed to mention she's also the most beautiful. I smiled, genuinely amused by his shameless flirting. He probably didn't notice. Daniel laughed, a warm, rich sound that filled Adrian's office. Boy, then he's either blind or an idiot, possibly both. I felt Adrian's stare burning into the side of my face, but I didn't look at him, just maintained my pleasant professional demeanor, while Daniel continued to be effortlessly charming, asking about my background, my interests, treating me like an actual person instead of a piece of office equipment. "We should have dinner while I'm here," Daniel suggested as the meeting wrapped up. "I'd love to hear your perspective on the merger. Adrian says you know more about the details than anyone." "I'd like that," I said, before Adrian could interject, and the smile Daniel gave me was worth the muscle I felt tightening in Adrian's jaw. After Daniel left, Adrian stood at his desk, shuffling papers that didn't need shuffling, his movements tight with barely controlled irritation. "You don't have to have dinner with him," he said, without looking at me. "I know I don't have to," I replied, gathering my tablet. "I want to. He's only here for a week. It's not appropriate to blur professional boundaries." I actually laughed at that, a short, sharp sound that made Adrian finally meet my eyes. "Professional boundaries? That's really what you're going with. What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you've never cared about professional boundaries when Camilla drapes herself across your desk, or when Sarah from accounting finds excuses to touch your arm during meetings, or when literally any attractive woman in this building flirts with you. But suddenly when someone shows interest in me, it's inappropriate." His face hardened. "That's different." "How?" "Because you work directly for me. Because it complicates things. Because..." He stopped, seeming to catch himself, before saying something he couldn't take back. "Because what, Adrian?" I pressed, moving closer to his desk, feeling reckless and powerful in a way I'd never felt before. "Because you don't like it. Because for once, someone is paying attention to me instead of you, and it bothers you." "Don't be ridiculous," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I'm having dinner with Daniel tomorrow night," I said firmly. Unless you have a work-related reason why I shouldn't, which we both know you don't." I walked out before he could formulate a response, before I could see the expression on his face that I knew would be some complicated mixture of anger and something else. Something that looked too much like jealousy for a man who had never wanted me in the first place. Thursday, I wore a deep emerald dress that made my eyes look almost green, and when Daniel arrived to pick me up from the office at 7, looking impeccable in a tailored suit, Adrian was still there, supposedly working late, but really just manufacturing reasons to stay. "Ready?" Daniel asked, offering his arm with old-fashioned courtesy. "Absolutely," I said, linking my arm through his and feeling Adrian's stare follow us all the way to the elevator. Dinner was lovely. Daniel was intelligent and funny, and genuinely interested in what I had to say, treating me like an equal instead of an accessory. And for 3 blissful hours I forgot about Adrian Murillo and his complicated stares and the way he made my stomach knot with wanting things I had no business wanting. Daniel walked me to my car afterwards, his hand warm on the small of my back, and when we said goodnight he kissed my cheek and murmured, "You're extraordinary, Estella. I hope you know that." I drove home with his words wrapping around me like armor, another layer of protection against the part of me that still stupidly wanted Adrian's approval, his attention, his desire. Friday morning Adrian was already in his office when I arrived. Unusual since he typically came in after me, and when I walked past his door he called out, "Estella? A moment." I set down my bag and entered his office, maintaining the professional distance I'd established all week, and he gestured to the chair across from his desk. "How was dinner?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Lovely," I replied. "Daniel is excellent company." Something flashed across Adrian's face. "Quick and dark. I'm sure he is. He has quite the reputation." "What kind of reputation?" "The kind where he dates a different woman in every city he visits." I smiled, unbothered. "Good thing I'm not looking for anything serious then." Adrian's jaw clenched. "I'm just saying you should be careful. He's not the type to—" "Adrian," I interrupted, keeping my voice level. "With all due respect, my personal life is none of your business. You made that very clear when you spent 3 years not caring who I dated or what I did outside this office." "That's not fair, isn't it?" I challenged. You never asked. Never showed even the slightest interest in me as a person. And now suddenly, because someone else does, you think you have the right to give me warnings about his intentions. He stood up, moving around the desk with that predatory grace he had, and I forced myself to stay seated, to not show how much his proximity affected me. I'm trying to protect you, he said, and he was close enough now that I could smell his cologne, that expensive cedar scent that had haunted me for 3 years. I don't need your protection, I said, standing so we were nearly eye level in my heels. I need you to let me live my life without your suddenly convenient concern. We stood there, inches apart, and the air between us felt charged with everything we weren't saying. 3 years of tension and want and denial crackling like electricity. This isn't about Daniel, Adrian said finally, his voice low and rough. This is about you changing everything, acting like a completely different person. I'm not different, I corrected. I'm just not hiding anymore, and apparently you can't handle that. Can't handle what exactly? Can't handle that other men notice me now. Can't handle that I'm not your invisible assistant anymore. Can't handle that I have a life outside of organizing yours. His hand came up like he might touch my face but stopped halfway, and I saw conflict war across his features, desire and restraint, and something that might have been fear. You're right, he said quietly, and the admission clearly cost him. I can't handle it, and I don't know why. The honesty disarmed me, made the anger I'd been holding on to waver slightly, but I couldn't let myself soften. Not yet, not when I'd only just found my footing. Figure it out, Adrian, I said, stepping back. But don't expect me to wait around while you do. The pool party invitation came that afternoon. Company-wide email about an informal gathering at Marcus Chen's estate on Saturday. And this time when I saw it, I didn't immediately delete it like I would have done a month ago. This time I RSVP'd yes. Saturday arrived hot and bright, and I spent more time than I'd admit getting ready, choosing a black swimsuit that was elegant rather than revealing, but still showed enough to make a statement, covering it with a white linen dress that somehow managed to be both casual and sophisticated. When I arrived at the sprawling property, the party was already in full swing, people clustered around the massive pool, drinks flowing, music pulsing through hidden speakers, and I felt a moment of anxiety before pushing it down, because I belonged here as much as anyone else. Daniel found me within minutes, appearing at my side with 2 drinks and a smile that was becoming familiar. You came. I did. I accepted the glass. Some kind of colorful cocktail that tasted like summer. Surprised? Pleasantly, he said. Come on, let me introduce you around. The next hour passed in a blur of introductions and conversations, people who had worked in the same building as me for years, suddenly treating me like I'd just arrived, like I was someone worth knowing. And while part of me resented how shallow it all was, another part enjoyed the attention, the validation that I could exist in these spaces without shrinking myself. I was laughing at something Daniel said, his hand resting casually on my waist, when I felt the atmosphere shift, felt that particular electricity that meant Adrian had arrived. I didn't turn around, didn't give him the satisfaction of knowing I'd noticed, but I tracked his movement through the party like radar, the way people gravitated toward him, the way he commanded attention without trying, and I felt the exact moment he saw me. It was like a physical touch, his gaze landing on me and Daniel standing close by the pool, and when I finally allowed myself to glance his direction, I saw an expression on his face that I'd never seen before, something raw and possessive and barely controlled. Camilla was at his side within seconds, her hand on his arm, her voice carrying across the patio. Adrian, come swimming with me. But he wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me with an intensity that made my breath catch despite my best efforts to stay unaffected. Daniel leaned down to whisper in my ear, "Your boss looks like he wants to murder me." "Let him look," I said, but my voice wavered slightly because Adrian had started walking toward us, cutting through the crowd with singular purpose, and I knew with absolute certainty that whatever happened in the next few minutes would change everything. He stopped in front of us, jaw tight, eyes dark with something that looked like fury but burned like desire, and when he spoke his voice was controlled but dangerous. "Estella, can I speak with you privately? We're in the middle of a conversation," Daniel said pleasantly, but there was steel underneath it. "And I wasn't asking you," Adrian replied, not even looking at him, his entire focus locked on me like I was the only person at this party, like I was the only person in the world, and despite everything, despite my anger and my resolution and my newly found independence, I felt myself responding to that attention like I'd been starving for it, which I had been. For 3 long years, I'd been starving for exactly this. It's fine, I told Daniel, squeezing his arm in reassurance. I'll just be a minute. Adrian turned and walked toward the house without checking if I was following, that arrogant assumption that I would come when summoned, and I hated that he was right. Hated that even now some part of me still responded to his unspoken commands. I followed him inside, through the crowded house to a quiet study at the back, and when he closed the door behind us, the silence felt loaded with everything we'd been dancing around all week. "What are you doing?" he asked, and his control was slipping. I could hear it in his voice. "I'm at a party," I said calmly. "The same party you're at? With him? You're here with him. I'm here with whoever I want to be here with." Adrian moved closer, crowding into my space in a way that should have felt aggressive, but instead felt electric, charged with 3 years of denied attraction and unspoken want. "This isn't you. You don't know what's me," I shot back. "You never bothered to find out. That's not true, isn't it? Name one thing about me that isn't related to work. One personal thing you've learned in 3 years. He opened his mouth, closed it, and I saw the realization hit him that he couldn't, that he'd been so focused on keeping me at a distance, that he'd never let himself actually see me until I forced him to. "I thought so," I said, moving toward the door. His hand caught my wrist, gentle but firm, and when I turned back to him, his expression was almost desperate. "I'm trying to now?" "Why?" The question came out sharper than I intended. "Why now, Adrian? Because I'm suddenly worth looking at. Because other men want me, so now I have value. Because I'm not convenient background noise anymore. Because I was an idiot," he said, and the raw honesty in his voice made my chest ache. "Because I spent 3 years convincing myself you were just my assistant, when the truth is you've been the most important person in my life, and I was too stupid and too scared to admit it." The words should have felt like victory, but instead they felt like a trap. Like everything I'd wanted to hear 3 years ago, arriving exactly when I'd finally built enough walls to protect myself. "You're going to have to do better than that," I said quietly, pulling my wrist from his grasp. "You're going to have to prove you actually see me, not just the version you want. And you're going to have to accept that I'm not waiting around, hoping you'll finally decide I'm worthy of your attention." I walked out before he could respond, before I could see if my words had landed, before I could let him see how much his confession had shaken me. Daniel was waiting by the pool, and when he saw my face, he pulled me close and asked if I was okay, and I let myself lean into his kindness, while across the patio, I felt Adrian's stare burning into my back. The game had changed, and I was no longer sure who was winning.
Daniel showed up like a gentleman, and Adrian nearly had a jealousy-induced stroke. "Buddy, you had 3 years to make a move. Sit down and cry."
Chapter 4. The Rejection That Changes Everything. I stayed at that party far longer than I'd planned, partly because leaving would have felt like running and I was done running from Adrian Murillo, and partly because Daniel's company was genuinely enjoyable, uncomplicated in a way that felt like relief after the suffocating tension of that study conversation. We swam, we drank, we laughed with a group of people from various departments who suddenly found me fascinating, and through it all, I felt Adrian's presence like a storm system hovering on the edge of the horizon, dark and inevitable and waiting to break. He didn't approach me again, but he watched, standing with a group of executives nursing the same glass of scotch for over an hour, his attention split between whatever conversation he was supposed to be having, and tracking my every movement with an intensity that should have been unsettling, but instead made my skin feel too tight, too warm. Camilla noticed. Of course she noticed, and I watched her cycle through confusion to anger to something calculating as she realized that Adrian's distraction had a very specific source. Around 8, the sun started setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and someone suggested moving the party inside to continue dancing. Daniel's hand found mine as we walked toward the house, his fingers lacing through mine naturally, and I let him because it felt good to be wanted without complications, without 3 years of baggage weighing down every interaction. The music inside was louder, bodies pressed closer together, and Daniel pulled me into the makeshift dance floor with easy confidence, his hands settling on my waist like they belonged there. "You're tense," he murmured near my ear, close enough that I felt his breath against my skin. "Just not used to this," I admitted, trying to relax into the movement. "Used to what?" "Dancing, parties, having a good time?" "All of it," I said honestly, "and I've spent 3 years working instead of living." "Then it's about time you started living," he said, spinning me out and then back against his chest, and I laughed despite myself, despite the weight of Adrian's stare that I could feel even from across the room. We danced through 2 songs, then 3, Daniel charming and attentive, and everything a man should be when he's interested in a woman, and I tried to focus on that, on the simplicity of being noticed and wanted and pursued without games. But then the song changed to something slower, more intimate, and Daniel's hands moved to my lower back, drawing me closer, and I saw Adrian move from my peripheral vision, saw him cross the room with purpose that made my pulse spike with anticipation and dread. "Mind if I cut in?" Adrian's voice came from directly behind me, cold and controlled and absolutely not a request. Daniel's hands tightened slightly on my waist, protective. "Actually, yes, I do mind. I wasn't asking you," Adrian said again, that same phrase he'd used earlier, but with more edge now, more barely leashed aggression. I turned to face him, stepping slightly away from Daniel, and the look on Adrian's face was dangerous. All pretense of professional distance burned away, leaving something raw and possessive that made my stomach flip. "And Adrian, you're being inappropriate," I said quietly, aware of the people starting to notice our little tableau, the way conversations were pausing to watch. "I need to talk to you," he said, not even attempting to sound reasonable anymore. "We already talked. Not enough. Not nearly enough." Daniel moved to stand beside me, his hand finding mine again. "The lady said no, mate. You should probably respect that." Adrian's eyes finally left mine to focus on Daniel, and the hostility between them was palpable, electric. Two men sizing each other up over a woman who supposedly belonged to neither of them. "This doesn't concern you," Adrian said, each word precise and cutting. "It concerns me when you're harassing someone I care about." "Harassing?" Adrian's laugh was sharp and humorless. "I'm her boss. I have every right to speak with my assistant. Not when your assistant is off the clock and clearly doesn't want to speak with you." They were squaring off now, testosterone and territoriality making them both stupid, and I felt anger rise in my chest that they were doing this here, in front of everyone, treating me like property to be disputed rather than a person with agency. "Both of you. Stop," I said, my voice cutting through their posturing. "I'm not a prize to be won. I'm not something either of you gets to claim. And I'm certainly not going to stand here while you have a pissing contest over me like I don't have a say in the matter." I pulled my hand from Daniel's, gentle but firm, and stepped away from both of them, creating space that felt necessary for my sanity. "Daniel, thank you for a lovely evening, but I think I should go. Let me drive you," he offered immediately. "I'm fine to drive myself," I said, then softened slightly because he didn't deserve my anger. He'd been nothing but kind. "I'll see you Monday, okay?" He nodded, shooting one last warning glare at Adrian before disappearing into the crowd. And then it was just me and Adrian standing in the middle of a dance floor full of people pretending not to watch, while absolutely watching. "Happy now?" I asked, not bothering to hide my irritation. "You've successfully ruined my night and made a scene in front of half the company. You think I care about that?" Adrian said, moving closer, and there was something unhinged in his eyes, something desperate that I'd never seen before. "You think I care about any of them seeing when all I can think about is him touching you, looking at you like he has the right. He has more right than you do," I shot back. He actually bothered to notice I existed before someone else showed interest. "I noticed," Adrian said, his voice dropping lower, more dangerous. "I've always noticed. I just didn't let myself." "Didn't let yourself what, Adrian?" I challenged, all the frustration and hurt from 3 years bubbling up and spilling over. "Didn't let yourself want the boring assistant? Didn't let yourself see me as anything other than convenient? Didn't let yourself admit that maybe I was worth more than just organizing your schedule?" "You were always worth more," he said, and his hand came up to cup my face, thumb brushing across my cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "You were always everything, and that terrified me." The touch, the words, the raw honesty in his expression all combined to make my carefully constructed walls crack, but I couldn't let them fall. Not yet. Not when I'd only just learned to stand on my own. "Terror doesn't excuse cruelty," I said, pulling away from his touch even though it hurt. "It doesn't excuse 3 years of making me feel invisible." "I know," he said, and he looked wrecked, completely undone in a way I'd never seen Adrian Murillo look. "I know, and I'm sorry, and I don't know how to fix this, but I need to try because the thought of you with someone else is destroying me." Before I could respond, before I could process the weight of his admission, Camilla's voice cut through the moment like a knife. "Oh, well, isn't this touching?" she said, appearing beside us with a smile that was all venom. "Adrian finally admitting he has feelings for the help. How very Cinderella of you both." "Camilla, not now," Adrian said without looking at her, his eyes still locked on mine. "Oh, I think now is perfect," she continued, emboldened by whatever cocktail she'd been nursing all evening. "Everyone should know the truth. That poor little Estella has been pining after you for 3 years while you ignored her, and now that she's made herself pretty, suddenly you're interested. It's pathetic, really, for both of you." The crowd had gone quiet now, all pretense of not listening abandoned, and I felt humiliation wash over me hot and suffocating because she was right. She was absolutely right about all of it, and everyone knew it. "You need to leave," Adrian said to Camilla, his voice deadly calm. "Why?" Because I'm saying what everyone's thinking, that this is just you wanting what you can't have, that the second she stops playing hard to get, you'll get bored like you always do. Something inside me snapped. You're right, I said, looking directly at Camilla with a calm I didn't feel. I did pine after him for 3 years. I did make myself invisible, hoping that one day he'd notice me. I did waste time on someone who couldn't see past his own ego long enough to realize what was right in front of him. I turned to Adrian, whose face had gone pale, and continued. And you're right too, that this is probably just him wanting what he thinks he can't have, because Adrian doesn't know how to want anything except on his own terms, in his own time, when it's convenient for him. Adrian reached for me, but I stepped back, shaking my head. But you're wrong about one thing, I said, addressing Camilla again. I didn't change myself for him. I changed myself for me, because I got tired of being small and scared and invisible. So thank you, actually, for your cruelty last week, for making me realize that I deserved better than settling for scraps of attention from people who should have valued me all along. I looked around at the crowd of coworkers who had ignored me for years, now hanging on every word, and I felt nothing but contempt for all of them, for their shallow interest and their entertainment at my expense. I'm leaving, I announced to no one in particular, and I'm taking Monday off, and possibly Tuesday, because I think I've earned it after 3 years without a single sick day. Estella, Adrian started, but I held up my hand. Don't, I said quietly. Don't follow me. Don't call me. Don't show up at my apartment. Just don't. I need space to figure out what I actually want without you confusing everything. I walked out of that house with my head high, and my vision blurred with tears I refused to shed in front of them, and I made it to my car before the first sob broke free, sitting in the driver's seat with my hands shaking on the steering wheel, and my carefully constructed composure falling apart. My phone buzzed immediately. Adrian, please let me explain. Adrian, I'm sorry. Adrian, just tell me you got home safe. I turned my phone off without responding, started the car, and drove home through streets blurred by tears and streetlights. And when I finally made it to my apartment, I collapsed on my couch and let myself feel everything I'd been holding back. The humiliation of having my feelings exposed in front of everyone. The anger at Adrian for waiting so long to notice me. The confusion about whether his feelings were real or just possessive reaction to losing control. The fear that even now, even after everything, some part of me still wanted him. I cried until I had nothing left, until exhaustion dragged me under, and when I woke up Sunday morning to 37 missed calls and twice as many text messages, I made a decision. I was done letting Adrian Murillo dictate my emotional state. If he wanted me, really wanted me, he was going to have to prove it with more than pretty words in the middle of a party. He was going to have to show me with actions, with consistency, with the kind of effort I'd been giving him for 3 years without ever getting anything back. And if he couldn't do that, then I'd walk away and never look back, no matter how much it hurt, because I'd finally learned that I deserved someone who chose me first, not someone who only realized my value after I stopped offering it freely. The question was whether Adrian was capable of being that person, and I honestly had no idea what the answer would be. Chapter 5. Silence and Desperation. Monday morning, I woke up in my own bed with sunlight streaming through curtains I'd forgotten to close, and for the first time in 3 years, I didn't immediately reach for my phone to check Adrian's schedule. The freedom of it felt strange and terrifying and absolutely necessary. I made coffee slowly, without rushing, sat on my balcony in pajamas and watched the city move below me. All those people heading to offices and meetings and lives that suddenly seemed exhausting just thinking about them. My phone sat on the kitchen counter where I'd left it, still off, and I felt no compulsion to turn it on. Whatever fires were burning at Murillo Enterprises today would have to burn without me. I spent Monday doing absolutely nothing productive, reading a novel I'd bought 6 months ago and never opened, taking a bath in the middle of the afternoon just because I could, ordering takeout and eating it on the couch while watching terrible reality television that required zero brain power. It felt decadent and wasteful and absolutely perfect. Tuesday, I ventured out, got my nails done at a salon I'd always walked past but never entered, bought fresh flowers from my apartment, sat in a cafe and people watched for 2 hours without checking the time once. I turned my phone on just long enough to text HR that I was taking personal days and would return Wednesday, then turned it off again before I could see the notifications that had surely piled up. I wasn't ready yet, wasn't ready to face the fallout from Saturday night, wasn't ready to see the office gossip, or deal with Adrian's inevitable attempts at conversation, wasn't ready to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do with feelings that contradicted themselves every 5 minutes. Because the truth was complicated and messy, and nothing like the clear-cut anger I wanted to feel. I was furious at Adrian for taking 3 years to see me, for only wanting me once someone else showed interest, for making me feel small and invisible and forgettable. But I also understood, in a way I hated admitting, that fear made people stupid, made them push away the things they wanted most, because wanting was vulnerability, and vulnerability was danger for someone like Adrian who'd built an empire on control and certainty. And underneath the anger and understanding was want. That stubborn, persistent want that 3 years and hurt feelings and public humiliation couldn't quite kill. The want that made me think about his hand on my face and the desperate honesty in his eyes and wonder if maybe, possibly, he was capable of being more than the emotionally stunted man I'd worked for. Tuesday night, I finally turned my phone on properly, and the screen lit up with a cascade of notifications that made my stomach drop. Adrian, I know you need space, but please just confirm you're safe. Adrian, I'm sorry for everything, for all of it. Adrian, the office isn't the same without you. Adrian, I don't know how to fix this. Adrian, please talk to me. 53 messages total, starting desperate and growing more resigned with each passing hour. And mixed in were calls from Daniel checking if I was okay, texts from coworkers I barely knew suddenly interested in my well-being, and one message from Camilla that I deleted without reading because I had no interest in whatever poison she was serving. But it was the final message from Adrian, sent at 2 a.m. last night, that made my chest tighten with something I couldn't quite name. Adrian, I understand if you hate me. I understand if you never want to speak to me again. But you should know that these 3 years weren't nothing to me. You were never invisible. I was just too much of a coward to admit that if I let myself really see you, I'd never be able to stop wanting you. And wanting you felt like losing control of everything I'd built. I'm sorry I let fear win. I'm sorry I hurt you. You deserved so much better. I read it 3 times, each time feeling my resolve waver a little more, because it was real and raw, and exactly the kind of honesty I'd been wanting from him. But words were easy. Words cost nothing. And I'd learned the hard way that Adrian Murillo was excellent at saying what people wanted to hear when it served his purposes. I needed to see if he could back those words with action. Wednesday morning, I walked into Murillo Enterprises at 8:45, 15 minutes later than my usual arrival, wearing a burgundy dress that made me feel powerful and heels that added 3 inches to my height and my confidence. The office went quiet when I stepped off the elevator, that particular hush that meant everyone had been talking about me, and now I'd arrived to interrupt their entertainment, and I met their stares with my head high and my expression neutral, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing discomfort. Adrian's office door was closed, which was unusual for this time of morning, and when I sat at my desk I found a note in his handwriting on my keyboard. Please come see me when you arrive. I took my time settling in, booting up my computer, checking emails, making myself coffee in the small kitchen area, while colleagues whispered and pretended not to watch. And finally, after I'd made him wait exactly 30 minutes, I knocked on his office door. "Come in," his voice came through, rougher than usual, tired. He was standing at the windows when I entered, hands in his pockets, shoulders tense, and when he turned to face me, I saw evidence of the same sleepless nights I'd had, shadows under his eyes and a tightness around his mouth that spoke of stress he wasn't managing well. "You came back," he said, like he'd half expected me not to. "I work here," I replied simply. "I'm not letting you chase me away from a job I'm excellent at." Something that might have been relief flickered across his face. "I wasn't trying to chase you away, I was trying to—" "I know what you were trying to do," I interrupted. "I got your messages, all of them." "All 53? Yes," he winced. "I may have been slightly excessive." "Slightly," I agreed, moving to stand across from his desk, maintaining professional distance. But we need to establish some boundaries if this is going to work." "This?" he asked, and I heard hope threading through the word that made my stomach flip. "This job, this working relationship," I clarified. "I'm not discussing anything personal until I figure out what I actually want, and that's going to take time." "How much time?" "However much I need," I said firmly. "And you pressuring me or showing up everywhere I am or having jealous reactions to men who talk to me isn't going to speed that process up. It's going to make me walk away permanently." Adrian absorbed that, his jaw working as he processed the boundaries I was setting, and I waited to see if he'd respect them or if his need for control would override his supposed feelings. "Okay," he said finally. "Whatever you need, whatever time you need, I can do that." "Can you, though?" I challenged. "Can you actually let me have space and autonomy without trying to manipulate the situation?" "I'll do my best," he said, and at least it was honest instead of a promise he couldn't keep. "I just need to know if there's a chance, if eventually, after you've figured things out, I don't know, I said, cutting off that line of questioning, and I'm not going to know until I have actual space to think without you in my ear, telling me what I should feel. He nodded, looking like I'd physically struck him, but accepting it nonetheless, and I turned to leave before the hurt in his eyes could erode my determination. Estella, he called when I reached the door, and I paused without turning around. For what it's worth, I meant every word of that last message. You were never invisible to me. I was just terrified of what it would mean if I admitted how much you mattered. I didn't respond, just walked out and closed the door behind me, and spent the rest of the morning pretending my hands weren't shaking and my heart wasn't racing with the weight of everything unsaid between us. The week crawled by with painful awkwardness, Adrian clearly trying to respect my boundaries, while also being unable to completely hide his awareness of me, his eyes tracking my movements even when he thought I wasn't looking, his voice getting softer when he spoke to me, small gestures of consideration that hadn't been there before. He started saying good morning when I arrived, actually looking at me when he did it. He asked if I'd eaten lunch instead of just assuming I'd work through it. He noticed when I stayed late and told me to go home, that whatever it was could wait until tomorrow. Small things, but things that showed he was trying, that he was actually seeing me instead of just using me, and I hated how much those small things affected me, how they made the anger harder to hold on to. Daniel called Thursday afternoon, asked if I wanted to get dinner, and I said yes, partly because I enjoyed his company, and partly because I needed to know if what I felt for Adrian was real, or just 3 years of wanting something I couldn't have finally being offered. We went to a small Italian place downtown, and Daniel was charming as always, making me laugh with stories from the London office, treating me like I was fascinating. But something felt off, flat, like I was going through the motions of a date without any of the spark that should be there. You're distracted, Daniel observed over wine and pasta. Want to talk about it? Not particularly, I said, then softened. And I'm sorry, you don't deserve me being mentally elsewhere. It's him, isn't it? Daniel said, not unkindly. Your boss. I considered lying, decided he deserved better. Yes. Do you love him? The question caught me off guard, made me actually think about it instead of just reacting. I don't know if what I feel is love or just 3 years of wanting validation from someone who wouldn't give it to me. Those can look similar, Daniel agreed. But usually you know the difference if you're honest with yourself. I met his eyes across the table, saw understanding there instead of hurt. I think I need to figure that out before I can be fair to anyone else, including me, he finished, smiling slightly. I appreciate the honesty, even if the timing is terrible for my ego. You're an incredible man, I said, meaning it. And then some woman is going to be very lucky. Just not you, he said without bitterness. Just not me, I confirmed quietly. He drove me home, kissed my cheek at my door, and told me he hoped I figured out what I wanted, and I watched him leave feeling grateful for his grace and more confused than ever about my own feelings. Friday afternoon, everything came crashing down. I was at my desk reviewing contracts when I heard raised voices from Adrian's office, his door slightly ajar, and I recognized Camilla's sharp tone cutting through his deeper responses. You're making a fool of yourself over her, Camilla was saying, loud enough to carry. Everyone's talking about it. About how pathetic it is that Adrian Murillo is chasing after his assistant like some lovesick puppy. My personal life isn't up for discussion, Adrian replied, his voice tight with controlled anger. It is when it affects your professional reputation, she shot back. Do you have any idea what people are saying? That you're having a midlife crisis? That you're only interested because she made herself pretty? That the second she gives in, you'll get bored and move on to the next shiny thing? People can say whatever they want, can they? Because I think you're confusing lust with actual feelings. The old Estella, the mousy, boring one who did nothing but work. You didn't want her. You made that very clear. So what's different now except that she looks better? That she's playing hard to get? You don't actually want her, Adrian. You want to win because someone else showed interest. The words hit something in me, echoing my own fears with devastating accuracy. And I should have walked away, should have given them privacy, but I was frozen at my desk listening to my worst thoughts spoken aloud. You don't know what you're talking about, Adrian said, but there was something in his voice, some uncertainty that made my stomach drop. Don't I? Be honest with yourself. When she was just your plain assistant, when she wore those shapeless clothes and no makeup, and kept her head down, did you want her then? Did you even notice her as a woman? The silence stretched too long for my comfort, too long for my hope. And when Adrian finally spoke, his words destroyed everything. It's not about how she looks, Camilla. Then what is it about? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you only started caring when she became someone other men wanted. The truth is, Adrian, people are only paying attention to her now because she's attractive. Before, no one would have looked twice, including you. That's not, Adrian started, but I didn't hear the rest because I was standing in his doorway. My hands clenched so tight my nails cut into my palms, and both of them turned to see me standing there with my heart breaking in real time. Camilla's eyes widened with something like triumph. Adrian's face went white with horror. Estella, he began, moving toward me. "Don't," I said, my voice shaking with rage and hurt. "Don't say another word. That came out wrong. I didn't mean, didn't you?" I asked, and I sounded distant to my own ears, disconnected from the devastation flooding through me, because it sounded like you were agreeing with her, that people only notice me now because I'm pretty, that before I wasn't worth anyone's attention, including yours. "No," I was trying to say. "I don't care what you were trying to say," I interrupted, feeling something fundamental crack inside me. "I care about what you actually said, about the fact that when she asked if you wanted me before, when I was just your plain assistant, you couldn't even answer. You just went silent because we both know the truth. Estella, please, let me explain." "There's nothing to explain," I said, backing toward the door. "You've made it perfectly clear. I wasn't worth your attention when I was invisible, when I was just competent and loyal and always there. I only became interesting when other men showed interest, when I fit your aesthetic standards, when I became something worth possessing instead of just someone worth knowing." Tears were burning behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall, refused to give either of them the satisfaction. "That's not true," Adrian said desperately. "You've always been—" "Stop," I said, my voice breaking. "Just stop lying to me and to yourself. You don't want me, Adrian. You never did. You want to win. You want to control. You want to possess what you think belongs to you, but you don't actually want me, the person I am underneath the clothes and the hair and the makeup. That's not fair." "Fair?" I laughed, harsh and bitter. "You want to talk about fair? Was it fair to ignore me for 3 years? Was it fair to let her insult me to my face without defending me? Was it fair to only notice I existed once I stopped being convenient?" I turned to Camilla, who was watching with barely concealed satisfaction. "You were right about one thing. He doesn't actually want me. He wants the idea of me, the challenge of me, the possession of me. But the real me, the woman who spent 3 years being loyal and invisible, she was never enough, was she?" I looked back at Adrian, saw anguish on his face that might have been real, but I couldn't trust it anymore. Couldn't trust anything he said or did, because it would always be tainted by the knowledge that he only saw me as valuable after I changed my appearance. "I'm done," I said quietly, "and I'm done with this job. Done with you. Done with pretending any of this could ever be real. Estella, don't do this. I quit," I said, the words feeling like freedom and devastation simultaneously. "Effective immediately. I'll send HR my formal resignation tonight." "Please," Adrian said, and he looked wrecked, completely undone. "Please don't leave like this. Let me fix this." "You can't fix this," I said, my voice steadier now that the decision was made. "Because you broke something that was already fragile, already damaged by 3 years of being treated like I didn't matter. And I can't keep hoping you'll suddenly become someone who actually values me for more than surface appearances." I walked out of his office, grabbed my bag from my desk, and headed for the elevator without looking back, without acknowledging the stares from coworkers who had absolutely heard every word, without caring about anything except getting out of that building before I completely fell apart. Adrian followed me, calling my name, but I didn't stop, didn't turn around, just kept walking until the elevator doors closed between us and his devastated face disappeared from view. And then, finally, in the privacy of that descending elevator, I let myself break. Chapter 6. Aftermath. I made it to my apartment on autopilot, muscle memory guiding me through traffic and stoplights and turns I didn't consciously register. And when I finally closed my door behind me, the silence felt enormous and suffocating. I stood in my entryway for what might have been seconds or minutes, my bag still clutched in my hand, my heels still on my feet, my breathing shallow and uneven. And then the reality of what I'd just done crashed over me in waves. I'd quit. After 3 years of building my entire professional identity around being Adrian Murillo's indispensable assistant, I'd walked away without a backup plan, without another job lined up, without anything except wounded pride and shattered hope. The smart thing would have been to stay, to maintain professionalism, to secure another position before burning this bridge. But the thought of spending one more day in that office pretending I didn't hear Camilla's words echoing in my head made my skin crawl with humiliation. People are only paying attention to her now because she's attractive. Before, no one would have looked twice, including you. And Adrian's silence, that damning pause that confirmed everything I'd feared about his sudden interest, about whether any of it was real or just possessive reaction to losing control. I dropped my bag, kicked off my heels, and walked to my bedroom where I changed into pajamas, even though it was barely 5 in the afternoon, because the idea of wearing real clothes for one more second felt unbearable. My phone started buzzing immediately. "Adrian. Please answer, Adrian. Let me explain what you heard. Adrian, it's not what you think, Adrian. I'm coming to your apartment." That last message sent panic shooting through me, and I typed back quickly before he could actually show up. "Me, Don't. I meant what I said. I'm done. Adrian, you can't be done. We need to talk about this. Me. There's nothing to talk about. You hesitated when she asked if you wanted me before I changed my appearance. That hesitation told me everything I needed to know. Adrian, that's not why I hesitated. If you'd just let me explain. Me. No. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not going to let you talk me in circles until I don't trust my own perception. I heard what I heard. I saw your face. That's enough. Adrian, Estella, please. I turned my phone off completely. Couldn't handle seeing his name appear on my screen over and over. Couldn't handle the temptation to believe whatever explanation he'd manufacture because I wanted so badly for it to be real. The weekend stretched ahead of me empty and terrifying. No job to go to Monday morning. No structure to my days. Nothing except the wreckage of choices I'd made and feelings I couldn't quite sort through. I ordered delivery even though I wasn't hungry. Forced myself to eat because my body needed fuel even if my brain was too chaotic to care. And then I sat on my couch staring at nothing while my mind replayed every interaction with Adrian from the past month, looking for signs I'd missed, evidence that would prove me wrong. But the signs all pointed the same direction. He'd ignored me for 3 years until I changed my appearance. He'd only shown interest after Daniel and others started noticing me. He'd gotten possessive and jealous when confronted with competition, but had never pursued me when I was just his reliable, invisible assistant, and when directly challenged about whether he'd wanted me before, when it mattered most, he couldn't even say yes. My doorbell rang around 7, and I knew without checking who it would be. Could feel Adrian's presence on the other side of that door like atmospheric pressure before a storm. I didn't answer. Estella, I know you're in there. His voice came through, muffled, but clear. Please, just 5 minutes. Just let me explain. I stayed on the couch, silent and still, hating myself for how much I wanted to open that door, how much some pathetic part of me still hoped he could say something that would make this better. What you heard today, it wasn't the full conversation, he continued, and I could hear desperation threading through his tone. Camilla was twisting things, trying to make it sound like I only noticed you after you changed, but that's not true. I swear that's not true. Silence from me, but he kept talking to my closed door like maybe enough words would unlock it. And I hesitated because the question was loaded. Because admitting I wanted you before meant admitting I'd been a coward for 3 years. Meant admitting I'd been attracted to you the entire time, but convinced myself you were off limits. Convinced myself that keeping you at a distance was professional, when really it was just fear. The words sounded good, sounded exactly like what I wanted to hear, but words were cheap, and Adrian was excellent at saying what served his purposes. I noticed you, he said. Quieter now. Every single day for 3 years, I noticed you. Noticed how you took your coffee black with 1 sugar. Noticed how you bit your lip when you were concentrating. Noticed how you smiled at everyone except me, because I'd made sure you knew smiling at me was unwelcome. Noticed how you stayed late without being asked and never complained and made my entire life function smoothly. I closed my eyes, his words landing like physical blows because they felt true, but I couldn't trust my own judgment anymore. Couldn't trust that I wasn't just hearing what I desperately wanted to believe. And the reason I didn't say anything when Camilla asked if I wanted you before isn't because the answer was no, Adrian continued. It's because the answer was yes. Has always been yes. And admitting that out loud to someone like her felt like exposing something I'd kept hidden for so long that saying it would make it too real, too vulnerable. My hands were clenched so tight, my nails were cutting crescents into my palms, and I forced myself to breathe slowly, deeply, to not open that door no matter how much I wanted to. But you're right, that I'm a coward, he said, and his voice cracked slightly. Yoon, you're right that I only acted on it when someone else showed interest. Only let myself admit what I felt when the alternative was watching you be with someone else. And that's not fair to you. It's not enough. And I understand if you can't forgive that. The silence after his words felt heavy, loaded with everything we'd both been too scared to say for 3 years, and I waited to see if he'd leave or keep trying. I'm going to go, he finally said. But I need you to know that this isn't about winning or possessing or controlling. This is about the fact that I've been half in love with you since about month 6 of working together, and I was too much of an idiot to do anything about it until I thought I'd lost you. I heard his footsteps retreating, heard the elevator chime, and only then did I let out the breath I'd been holding. Only then did I let the tears come because his confession should have felt like victory, but instead it felt like grief, for something that could have been beautiful if only he'd been brave enough sooner. That night, I barely slept, tossing between anger and longing and confusion, and when morning finally came, I felt hollowed out and exhausted. My phone had 17 new messages when I turned it on, but only one that made my heart stutter. Adrian, I'm not giving up on us, but I'll give you the space you asked for. Just know that I'm here whenever you're ready to talk. I'm sorry I made you feel invisible. You were never invisible to me. You were just so bright I convinced myself looking directly at you would blind me. I read it 3 times, each time feeling something shift in my chest, because the honesty felt raw and real in a way his previous messages hadn't. Felt like he was finally telling the truth instead of saying what he thought I wanted to hear. But honesty wasn't enough. Not after 3 years of being treated like I didn't matter. Not after hearing that conversation with Camilla. Not after building my entire professional life around someone who couldn't even defend me when it counted. I needed time. Time to figure out if what I felt was love or just the remnants of a 3-year infatuation. Time to decide if Adrian was capable of being the man I needed, or if he would always be the man who only valued me once I stopped being convenient. Time to rebuild myself into someone who existed independently of him, who had worth that wasn't tied to his approval or attention. So I didn't respond to his message, just got up and started planning the next chapter of my life, one that didn't revolve around Adrian Murillo and his complicated feelings and his beautiful broken confessions. I updated my resume, reached out to contacts at other companies, scheduled interviews for positions that would challenge me and pay me what I was actually worth, instead of what I'd been accepting. I went to the gym, to museums, to coffee shops where I read and thought, and slowly started recognizing myself again without the weight of Adrian's expectations crushing me into something smaller. And through it all, I felt his absence like a phantom limb, painful and persistent. But I didn't reach out, didn't let myself fall back into patterns that had hurt me. 2 weeks passed, then 3. My phone stayed mostly silent, Adrian respecting my request for space, even though I knew it was probably killing him, and I started to believe that maybe I could actually do this, actually move on and build something new, until the envelope arrived. Hand-delivered by courier on a Thursday afternoon, thick cream paper with my name written in Adrian's precise handwriting, and inside was a letter that shattered every defense I'd carefully constructed. Estella, I'm writing this because you asked me not to call or show up, and I'm trying to respect that, even though every instinct I have is screaming to ignore your boundaries and fight for what we could have. But you were right about everything. I was a coward. I did ignore you for 3 years when I should have been brave enough to admit what I felt. I did only act when someone else showed interest. I did let fear control me instead of being honest. And I let Camilla insult you, not just once but repeatedly, because stopping her would have meant admitting that you mattered to me in ways that made me vulnerable. What you heard that day wasn't the full truth, but it wasn't entirely a lie either. I did notice you more after you changed, but not because you suddenly became attractive, because Estella, you were always beautiful, always magnetic, always everything. I noticed you more because you finally let yourself be visible, because you stopped hiding behind shapeless clothes and tight buns, and the armor of invisibility you'd built. And seeing you step into your power made me realize I was about to lose the most important person in my life. But you deserved someone who saw that power in you all along, who encouraged you to shine instead of being comfortable with you dimming yourself, and I failed you in that. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me. I don't know if I deserve forgiveness, but I need you to know that every word I said at your door was true. I've been in love with you for longer than I want to admit, terrified of what that meant, terrified of wanting someone who knew every dark corner of my life, terrified that if I let myself love you and you left, I would never recover. So I kept you at a distance and told myself it was professional when really it was just self-preservation. I'm not asking you to come back. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm just asking you to believe that you were never, ever invisible to me. You were always the brightest thing in every room, and I was just too much of a coward to tell you. Whatever you decide, whoever you choose to be with, I hope you know your worth now. I hope you know you deserve someone who chooses you first, who sees you clearly, who isn't afraid of how much power you have. I'm sorry I wasn't that person when it mattered, but I'm trying to be now, even if it's too late. Adrian. I read the letter sitting on my bedroom floor with tears streaming down my face, and for the first time since walking out of his office, I let myself actually feel everything I'd been pushing down, the love and hurt and hope all tangled together into something painful and beautiful and impossible to deny, and I realized with devastating clarity that I'd been lying to myself about being over him, about being able to move on cleanly, because the truth was, I loved him despite everything, despite the pain and the fear, and the very real possibility that he might hurt me again. The question wasn't whether I loved him. The question was whether love was enough to bridge 3 years of mistakes and build something real from the wreckage, and I genuinely didn't know the answer. Chapter 7. The Choice I Kept. Adrian's letter in my nightstand drawer where I wouldn't see it constantly but knew exactly where it was. A physical reminder of everything unresolved between us. And for days I pulled it out and reread it looking for lies I couldn't find, for manipulation I couldn't detect, for any sign that his words were calculated instead of genuine. But the letter felt true in a way that terrified me, because believing it meant risking everything I'd rebuilt, meant potentially walking back into a situation that had already destroyed me once. 3 weeks after quitting, I had 2 solid job offers, both at companies that would value my skills and pay me significantly more than Adrian ever had, both positions that would challenge me and give me the fresh start I'd been telling myself I needed. I should have been celebrating, should have felt nothing but relief and excitement about moving forward, but instead, I felt hollow, like I was going through motions that looked right from the outside, while everything inside me remained fractured. My phone rang on a Friday evening, unknown number, and I almost didn't answer until something made me pick up. Estella Vikaji, a woman's voice, professional and unfamiliar. Yes, this is Rebecca Chen from Mercy General Hospital. You're listed as an emergency contact for Adrian Murillo. My heart stopped, literally stopped for a beat before slamming back into rhythm. What happened? Mr. Murillo was in a car accident about 2 hours ago. He's stable now, but he was asking for you, and I wanted to let you know he's in room 412 if you'd like to visit. The world tilted sideways, and I gripped my phone so hard I heard the case crack. Is he okay? How bad is it? He has a concussion and some bruised ribs. Nothing life-threatening, but the doctor wants to keep him overnight for observation. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I said, already grabbing my keys, my rational brain completely bypassed by the visceral terror of Adrian being hurt, of Adrian asking for me, of Adrian possibly needing me. The drive to the hospital passed in a blur of traffic lights and mounting panic, and when I finally burst through his room door slightly out of breath and definitely not composed, I found him sitting up in bed looking pale and tired, but alive, so beautifully alive that I felt tears burn behind my eyes. His head turned when I entered, and the expression that crossed his face was complicated, surprise and relief, and something that looked like love all tangled together. "Estella," he said, his voice rough. "You came." "Of course I came," I said, moving to his bedside before I could think better of it. "They said you were in an accident," I thought. I couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't articulate the terror that had gripped me during that drive. "I'm fine," he said, reaching for my hand and then stopping himself, remembering boundaries, remembering that I'd asked for space. "I'm just careless, wasn't paying attention, ran a red light. That's not fine. That's dangerous and stupid," and I stopped, taking a breath because yelling at him while he was injured felt cruel, even if I was furious at him for scaring me. "I know," he said quietly. "I've been distracted lately." We both knew what he meant, who he'd been distracted by, and the air between us felt charged with everything unsaid. "Mao, why am I still your emergency contact?" I asked, the question coming out sharper than intended. "I quit 3 weeks ago, because there's no one else I'd want called if something happened to me," Adrian said simply. "Because even if you hate me, even if you never speak to me again, you're still the person I trust most in the world." The honesty of it hit me square in the chest, made breathing difficult for reasons that had nothing to do with the antiseptic smell of the hospital room. "I don't hate you," I said, sitting in the chair beside his bed, because my legs suddenly felt unreliable. "I wish I did. It would make this so much easier." "Make what easier?" "Leaving, moving on, accepting one of the job offers I have," I said, watching his face carefully for reaction. Pain flickered across his features, quickly masked. "You have offers. That's good. You deserve that." "Do you mean that?" "I mean everything I've said to you," he replied. "Even the things that came out wrong, even the silences that hurt you. All of it was true in its own broken way." A nurse came in to check his vitals, giving me a moment to collect myself, to figure out what I was actually doing here beyond the knee-jerk response to learning he'd been hurt. When she left, Adrian spoke first. "You got my letter?" "I did. And I don't know what to do with it," I admitted. "I don't know how to trust that you actually see me, that this isn't just you wanting what you think you've lost." "What would it take?" he asked, and there was desperation under the question, but also genuine curiosity, like he actually wanted to know instead of just wanting to win. "What would it take for you to believe me?" I thought about it, really thought instead of just reacting. Time, I think. Consistency. Proof that you value me even when I'm not convenient, even when I'm difficult, even when no one else is looking. "I can do that," he said immediately. "Can you, though?" I challenged. "Can you actually be patient and respectful of my boundaries without trying to manipulate the situation? Can you let me figure out what I want without pressuring me or making it about what you need?" "I can try," he said. "I know that's not a guarantee. I know I've already failed you in exactly those ways, but I'm willing to spend however long it takes proving to you that I can be better." I looked at him lying in that hospital bed, vulnerable in ways I'd never seen him, and something in my chest cracked open because this was real. This conversation was finally, actually real, instead of both of us performing roles we'd played for 3 years. "I'm scared," I said quietly. "And I'm scared that if I let myself believe you, if I let myself trust this, You'll disappoint me again and I won't survive it a second time. I'm scared too, Adrian admitted. I'm scared that I've broken something irreparable, that no matter what I do or say, you'll never be able to see me as anything other than the man who made you feel invisible. So where does that leave us? I don't know, he said honestly, but I know I don't want to lose you completely, even if all you can give me is friendship. Even if you take one of those jobs and I never see you again except occasionally running into each other, I need you to know that you changed my life. The words settled between us, heavy with meaning, and I felt the last of my anger dissolve into something more complicated, something that felt like grief for time we'd wasted and hope for what we might still become. And I need time, I said finally. Real time. Not a week or two, but actual months to figure out who I am without you, to make sure that if I come back, it's because I choose you, not because I'm afraid of starting over. I'll wait, Adrian said without hesitation. However long you need, I'll wait. And if I decide I can't do this, if I decide the hurt was too much, pain crossed his face, but he nodded, then I'll accept that, and I'll spend the rest of my life regretting that I wasn't brave enough when it mattered. I stood up, needing distance to think clearly. I'm going to take one of those job offers. I'm going to build a life that doesn't revolve around you. And if, after I do that, if I still feel this way, if you've actually proven through actions instead of words that you've changed, then maybe we can revisit this conversation. Okay, he said, and I could see it cost him to agree. Could see him fighting every instinct to argue or convince or control. Whatever you need. I moved toward the door, paused with my hand on the handle. Get some rest, Adrian. And for what it's worth, I'm glad you're okay. Estella, he called as I opened the door, and when I turned back, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. I love you. I know I don't have the right to say it. I know it's not enough to fix what I broke, but I need you to know that I love you, and I have for longer than I was willing to admit. The confession should have felt manipulative, timed for maximum impact while I was emotionally vulnerable, but instead it felt like truth, simple and devastating and completely genuine. I know, I said softly, and I read it in every line of your letter. I see it in your face right now, and that's what makes this so hard, because I love you too, and I don't know if that's enough. I left before he could respond, before I could see the hope bloom on his face, before I could let myself get swept up in the moment, instead of holding firm to the boundaries I needed. Outside the hospital, I sat in my car for a long time, hands shaking on the steering wheel, and let myself actually process what I'd just admitted out loud for the first time. I loved Adrian Murillo, despite everything, despite the pain and the fear and the very real possibility that he might hurt me again. I loved him. But loving someone didn't mean I had to be with them, didn't mean I had to sacrifice my own healing and growth for the possibility of something that might never work. I needed to love myself more than I loved him, needed to prove to myself that I could build a life, build worth, build happiness that wasn't dependent on his approval or attention. And if he was still there when I figured that out, if he'd actually done the work to become someone capable of loving me the way I deserved, then maybe we'd have a chance. But that was a maybe for the future, not a certainty for now. So I started my car and drove home. And the next morning, I accepted the job offer at Sterling & Associates, a smaller firm that valued innovation and gave me autonomy I'd never had working for Adrian. I moved apartments to a neighborhood that felt like a fresh start, decorated it in colors I loved instead of neutrals that felt safe, and slowly, painfully, beautifully, I started building a life that was mine, and through it all, true to his word, Adrian gave me space. No calls, no unexpected visits, no manipulation, just occasional text messages that proved he was thinking about me without demanding my attention. Adrian, saw this article about contract law and thought of you. Adrian, hope your first week at the new job is going well. Adrian, no pressure to respond. Just wanted you to know I'm proud of you. Simple messages that showed respect for my boundaries while keeping a thread of connection alive, and I appreciated them more than I could articulate because they proved he was capable of patience, of putting my needs above his wants. 3 months passed. Then 4, and I thrived at Sterling & Associates, made friends who knew me as Estella, the brilliant attorney, not Estella, the invisible assistant, dated casually without pressure, and discovered parts of myself I'd buried under years of making myself small. And slowly, gradually, I started to believe that maybe I could have both, could have the independent life I'd built, and the man I'd never stopped loving, if he'd actually changed, if he'd done his own work, if we could meet as equals instead of boss and assistant, controller and controlled.
He crashed the car, she ran to the hospital, and I almost actually killed Adrian, but then I remembered I needed him for the happy ending.
Chapter 8. Equal Ground. 5 months after leaving Murillo Enterprises, I walked into a coffee shop near my new office and found Adrian sitting at a corner table looking different in ways I couldn't immediately quantify. He saw me the same moment I saw him, and our eyes locked across the crowded space with the kind of recognition that felt like coming home and jumping off a cliff simultaneously. I hadn't planned this, hadn't known he'd be here, and the shock of seeing him in person after months of careful distance made my heart slam against my ribs with force that felt almost violent. He stood slowly, uncertain in a way I'd never seen Adrian Murillo be uncertain, and gestured to the empty chair across from him in silent question. I should have left, should have maintained the boundaries I'd worked so hard to establish, but my feet carried me toward him anyway because apparently 5 months wasn't enough to kill whatever gravitational pull existed between us. "Estela," he said when I reached the table, my name and his voice still doing devastating things to my composure. "I didn't know you came here." "I work 2 blocks away," I replied, staying standing, not committing to sitting yet. "This is my usual spot." "I'll leave," he said immediately, already reaching for his laptop bag. "I don't want to intrude on your space." "Don't," I said, surprising myself. "I mean, you don't have to leave. I can go somewhere else. Or you could sit," he suggested carefully. "If you want to. No pressure." I looked at him, really looked for the first time in months, and noticed the changes I'd initially missed. He looked tired but healthier somehow, like he'd been sleeping better despite the shadows under his eyes. His suit was still impeccable but less severe, charcoal instead of his usual black. And there was something in his expression, an openness that hadn't been there before, like he'd stopped hiding behind the CEO mask. 5 minutes, I said, sitting down. "I have a meeting at 2. 5 minutes, he agreed, relief flickering across his face before he controlled it. We sat in silence for a moment, both of us holding coffee cups like shields, and the tension between us felt different than before, less sharp and more sad, like we were mourning what we'd lost instead of fighting over what we wanted. "You look good," Adrian said finally. "Happy." "I am happy," I said, and realized it was true. "The new job is challenging. My apartment is actually mine instead of just a place I sleep. I've been taking pottery classes on weekends." "Pottery," he repeated, a small smile touching his lips. "I didn't know you were interested in that." "Neither did I admitted. "Turns out I didn't know a lot of things about myself because I was too busy being what everyone else needed." The words landed between us with weight we both felt. Acknowledgement of how much I'd lost myself trying to be his perfect assistant, and I saw him flinch slightly. "I'm in therapy," Adrian said abruptly, like he'd been holding it in and finally decided to just say it. "Have been for 3 months. Twice a week." That surprised me enough that I set down my coffee cup. "Why?" "Because I didn't know how to be a person instead of a CEO," he said simply. "Because I built my entire identity around control and success, and never let myself be vulnerable with anyone, because I hurt the most important person in my life and didn't want to be capable of doing that again." I studied his face, looking for signs this was performance, but all I saw was genuine effort, real change that went deeper than words. "What have you learned?" I asked, curious despite myself. "And that I use work to avoid intimacy," he said, ticking off points on his fingers like he was presenting a case. "That I was attracted to you from the beginning, but terrified of what it meant to want someone who actually knew me. That I kept you invisible because seeing you meant acknowledging feelings I didn't know how to handle. That my father's obsession with control fucked me up in ways I never addressed." The honesty was startling, so different from the careful politician I'd worked for, and I felt something in my chest loosen slightly. "And I promoted someone to replace you," he continued. "Marcus from legal. He's good, but he's not you. And I stopped expecting him to be. Stopped making my assistant responsible for my entire emotional landscape." "That's progress," I said, meaning it. "I also started actually going to the company events I always made excuses to skip," Adrian said. "Talked to people like they were humans instead of chess pieces." "Camilla transferred to the Singapore office. Her choice, not mine, but I think she realized I wasn't going to be what she wanted anymore." "What did she want?" "Someone who was emotionally unavailable enough to make her feel safe while successful enough to make her feel important," he said. "And I was that person for a long time, but I don't want to be anymore." I absorbed that, the implications of everything he was saying, the evidence of actual change instead of just promises. "I'm glad you're doing better," I said carefully. "Genuinely, I'm glad you're getting help and making changes." "But," he prompted, hearing what I wasn't saying. "But I don't know what you want from me," I admitted. "I don't know if you're telling me this because you want me to know you've changed, or because you think it'll make me come back, or because you just needed to say it out loud." Adrian was quiet for a long moment, staring at his coffee like it held answers. "Honestly, all 3. I want you to know I'm different because I am. I want you to consider giving me another chance because I still love you, and I needed to say it because holding it in was making me feel like a coward again." The naked honesty of it disarmed me completely, made all my careful defenses feel performative and unnecessary. "I'm not the same person I was 5 months ago either," I said, I'm not going to go back to being convenient or accommodating or willing to shrink myself to fit into your life. I don't want you to, Adrian said intensely. I want you exactly as you are now, confident and strong and completely unwilling to take my shit, because that version of you is who you were always meant to be, and I was too selfish to encourage it. Pretty words, I said, but without the bite the phrase might have had months ago. I know words aren't enough, he acknowledged. I know I need to prove it through action, through consistency, through actually being the person I'm claiming to be instead of just talking about it. So prove it, I challenged, not to get me back, not to win some game, but because it's the right thing to do regardless of whether I'm in your life or not. I have been, he said quietly. Well, these 5 months of not calling you every day, not showing up at your apartment, not manipulating situations to force you to see me, that was me proving it. Respecting your boundaries even when every instinct I had was screaming to fight for you, that was me proving it. I knew he was right, knew that the old Adrian would have never given me space, would have used every resource at his disposal to change my mind, and the fact that he hadn't meant something significant. And my 5 minutes are almost up, I said, glancing at my phone even though I didn't actually have a meeting until 3. Can I ask you something before you go? Adrian said, and when I nodded, he continued. Are you seeing anyone? I've been on some dates, I said honestly. Nothing serious. What about you? No, he said immediately. I can't. It wouldn't be fair to them when I'm still... He stopped, seeming to catch himself. Still what? Still completely in love with you, he finished, meeting my eyes with devastating directness. Still waking up, reaching for my phone to text you about random things. Still seeing something funny and wanting to share it with you. Still feeling like half of me is missing. My throat tightened with emotion. I didn't want to feel, didn't want to acknowledge because it meant I was still just as affected by him as he claimed to be by me. I need more time, I said, standing up because staying felt dangerous. I need to see that these changes stick, that this isn't just temporary effort to win me back. How much time? He asked, standing as well. I don't know, I admitted. Maybe we could try being friends first. See if we can actually have a healthy dynamic before we even think about anything else. Hope bloomed across his face so clearly it was almost painful to witness. Friends, coffee occasionally, conversation without expectations, getting to know each other as actual people instead of boss and assistant or whatever complicated thing we were before. I can do that, Adrian said, and I believed him because the eagerness in his voice was tempered with genuine respect for what I was offering. Then text me sometime, I said, slinging my bag over my shoulder. Not constantly, not desperately, just like a normal person who wants to maintain contact with someone they care about. I will, he promised. And as I walked toward the door, I felt his eyes on me, but he didn't follow, didn't push for more than I'd offered, and that restraint meant more than any grand gesture could have. Outside the coffee shop, I took a deep breath of cold air and let myself acknowledge what I'd been avoiding. I still loved him. 5 months of distance and growth and building a new life hadn't changed that fundamental truth, and maybe it never would. But love wasn't enough on its own. Love needed respect and effort, and 2 whole people choosing each other instead of one person desperately needing the other. And for the first time since this entire complicated mess began, I thought maybe we could actually have that, if Adrian kept proving he'd changed, if I kept building my own life independent of him, if we both did the work to become people capable of a healthy relationship instead of the toxic dynamic we'd had before. It was a lot of ifs, but it was also possibility, fragile and terrifying, and more real than anything we'd had before. My phone buzzed 2 hours later. Adrian, thank you for sitting with me today. That meant more than you know. I smiled despite myself, typed back carefully. Me, thank you for respecting my boundaries. That meant more than you know. Adrian, coffee again next week? Same place? Same time? Me. Maybe. Ask me in a few days. Adrian, I will. And he did. Exactly 3 days later. Not pushy, but consistent. Proving through small actions that he could be patient, could be respectful, could be the man I needed instead of just the man he'd been. We started having coffee weekly, then twice a week. Conversations that ranged from work to therapy to pottery to his complicated relationship with his father. And slowly, carefully, we built something that felt like friendship. Real friendship, where we challenged each other and laughed together and existed as equals instead of the hierarchical mess we'd been trapped in before. And underneath the friendship was attraction, undeniable and electric, but we didn't act on it, both of us knowing that rushing would ruin everything we were carefully constructing. 6 months became 7, then 8, and somewhere in there I realized I'd forgiven him, Not because he'd done enough to earn it, but because holding on to anger was exhausting and he'd proven through consistent action that he was different, was better, was worth the risk. The question was whether I was brave enough to take it. Chapter 9. The Leap. 8 months after our first coffee as friends, Adrian called me at 11 p.m. on a Thursday, which broke the unspoken rule we'd established about keeping contact during reasonable hours. And when I answered, my voice came out concerned instead of annoyed. "What's wrong?" "My father died," he said, and his voice was flat, emotionless in a way that told me he was barely holding himself together. "A heart attack about 2 hours ago. I'm at the hospital and I know it's late and we're just friends and I have no right to ask, but I don't know who else to call." "I'm on my way," I said, already grabbing my keys. "Text me which hospital." I found him in a waiting room that smelled like disinfectant and grief, sitting with his elbows on his knees and his head in his hands, and when he looked up at me, his eyes were red but dry, like he'd cried himself out or maybe couldn't cry at all. "You came," he said, standing slowly. "Of course I came," I replied, moving close enough to touch but not actually touching, letting him decide what he needed. "I'm so sorry, Adrian." He nodded, jaw working like he was trying to find words that wouldn't come, and then suddenly he was pulling me into his arms, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe, his face buried in my hair. I wrapped my arms around him and just held on, feeling his body shake with silent sobs he'd been holding back, and we stood there in that sterile waiting room while he finally let himself fall apart. "I never told him," Adrian said eventually, his voice muffled against my shoulder. "Never told him I was in therapy. Never told him I was trying to be different than he was. Never got the chance to prove I could be successful without being cruel." "He knew you were successful," I offered quietly. "But he didn't know I was trying to be good," Adrian said, pulling back to look at me with devastated eyes. "And he raised me to be ruthless and controlled and emotionally unavailable. And I spent 8 months unlearning that. And he died before I could show him there was another way." I cupped his face in my hands, thumbs brushing away tears he didn't seem to notice falling. "You don't need his validation to know you've changed. I see it. Your therapist sees it. Everyone who actually matters sees it. Do you?" he asked, and there was such vulnerability in the question. Do you actually see me as different, or are you just being kind?" "I see you," I said firmly. "I see you choosing patience over control. I see you respecting boundaries even when it's hard. I see you doing the work to be better without expecting applause for it. I see you, Adrian, and you're nothing like the man I worked for a year ago." He kissed me then, sudden and desperate and tasting like salt from tears. And I kissed him back without thinking because grief made people need connection, and I wasn't going to deny him comfort when he was breaking. But then the kiss deepened, shifted from seeking comfort to wanting more, and I pulled back gently, before we crossed a line we couldn't uncross. "Not like this," I said softly. "And not when you're grieving and vulnerable and not thinking clearly." "I'm always thinking clearly when it comes to you," he said, but he respected the boundary, stepping back and running a hand through his hair. "I'm sorry. That was inappropriate. It was human," I corrected. "And I'm not sorry it happened, but we need to be smart about this." "Smart," he repeated, laughing without humor. "I've spent 8 months being smart and patient and respectful, and all I want is to be with you. And I can't even have that because I fucked it up so badly before that you can't trust me." "That's not fair," I said, feeling my own emotions rising. "I'm here, aren't I? I came when you called. I'm holding you while you grieve. I'm in your life in a way I wasn't ready for months ago." "That means something. Does it mean you've forgiven me?" "Yes," I said, the admission coming easier than expected. "I forgave you months ago, Adrian. That's not the issue anymore." "Then what is?" he asked, genuine confusion crossing his face. "The issue is that I need to know this is real," I said, trying to articulate feelings I'd been circling for weeks. "And I need to know you want me for me, not because I'm familiar or convenient or the one person who understands your complicated relationship with your father. I need to know that if we do this, if we actually try, it's because you choose me as an equal partner, not because you need someone to fill a void." Adrian looked at me for a long moment, and I saw him actually process what I was saying instead of just reacting. "You think I only want you because of grief. I think grief makes people cling to what feels safe," I said carefully. "And I think we have history and chemistry and genuine care for each other, but I need to be sure you're choosing me for the right reasons." "The right reasons?" he said, moving to sit in one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs, and I sat beside him. "What would those be?" "That you love who I am now, not who you remember me being," I said. "That you want a partner, not an assistant who also sleeps with you. That you're ready for the mess and difficulty of an actual relationship instead of just the idea of one." "I am ready," Adrian said, turning to face me fully. "I've been ready for months. I've been waiting for you to be ready, and I thought maybe we were getting there, but now you're saying you still don't trust this. I'm saying I need to be careful, I corrected, because loving you almost destroyed me once, and if I'm going to risk that again, I need to be absolutely certain we're both in this for the right reasons. We sat in silence, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on us, and finally Adrian spoke. After the funeral, he said quietly, after I handle everything with my father's estate and get through the immediate grief, can we talk about this? Really talk. Not in a hospital waiting room at midnight, but somewhere we can actually think clearly. Yes, I agreed, because he was right that this wasn't the time or place for the conversation we needed to have. I stayed with him through the night, dozing in uncomfortable chairs and drinking terrible coffee, and when morning came, I drove him home because he was too exhausted to be safe behind a wheel. At his door he hugged me again, less desperate this time, but no less meaningful. Thank you for being here. Always, I said, and meant it. The funeral was 3 days later, a massive affair with business associates and distant relatives, and all the performance that came with burying a powerful man. And I sat in the back row because I wasn't family, wasn't anything official, just a friend supporting someone through grief. But Adrian's eyes found mine during the service, holding my gaze for moments that felt intimate despite the crowd, and I understood what he wasn't saying out loud. You're the only real thing here. After, at the reception at his father's estate, I watched him play the part of grieving CEO's son with practiced ease, accepting condolences and managing expectations, and never letting anyone see the real pain underneath. Until Camilla appeared. Back from Singapore, apparently, her hand on his arm possessive and familiar. Adrian, darling, I'm so sorry about your father, she said, loud enough to carry. If you need anything, absolutely anything, you know I'm here for you. I saw him tense, saw the old Adrian flash across his features for just a second before the new version took over, and he gently but firmly removed her hand from his arm. Thank you, Camilla, but I'm fine, he said politely. I appreciate you coming. The dismissal was clear, but she persisted. I was thinking maybe we could have dinner this week. Catch up. You shouldn't be alone right now. I'm not alone, Adrian said, and his eyes found mine across the room with an intensity that made my breath catch. Excuse me. He crossed the room to me, ignoring the curious stares, and when he reached me, he took my hand naturally, like it was the most normal thing in the world. Can we get out of here? He asked quietly. I can't do this anymore. All these people who didn't actually know him pretending to care. Yes, I said, lacing my fingers through his. Let's go. We left through a side door, escaping to his car and driving nowhere in particular, just away from the performance and expectations. And eventually, he pulled over at a lookout point that showed the city spread below us in afternoon light. I meant what I said, Adrian told me, engine off, both of us staring at the view, about not being alone. I'm not alone because I have you, because even though we're not together, even though you're still figuring out if you can trust this, you're the person I want with me during the hardest moments. Adrian, let me finish, he said, and I nodded, letting him speak. I've spent 8 months proving I've changed through actions, through therapy, through respecting your boundaries, and I'll keep doing that because it's the right thing regardless of whether you choose me. But I need you to know that I'm choosing you, actively and intentionally, not because you're familiar or safe or convenient, but because you're the only person who makes me want to be better. I'm scared, I admitted, my voice small. I'm scared of getting hurt again, scared of falling back into old patterns, scared that this feeling is too good to be real. I'm scared too, he said. I'm scared I'll fuck this up. Scared I'm not actually capable of being the partner you deserve. Scared that my father was right and I'm too broken to ever be good at loving someone. You're not broken, I said fiercely, turning to face him. You were raised by someone who didn't know how to love, but you've spent months learning, growing, becoming someone capable of real intimacy instead of just control. Then take a chance on me, Adrian said, taking both my hands in his. Not because I've earned it or proven enough or done some magical amount of work that makes it safe, but because you want to. Because underneath all the fear and caution you actually want to see where this could go. I looked at our joined hands, at his face showing every emotion instead of the careful mask he used to wear, at the evidence of 8 months of consistent effort and genuine change, and I realized he was right. I did want this. Wanted him. Not the sanitized safe version where we stayed friends forever, but the messy, complicated, real version where we actually tried to build something despite the risks. Okay, I said, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it. Okay, let's try this. Okay, he repeated, like he couldn't quite believe it. Okay, I confirmed, but we need rules, boundaries, agreements about how we handle this. Anything, Adrian said immediately. And whatever you need. We take this slow, I said, ticking off points. We keep seeing our respective therapists. We communicate even when it's uncomfortable. We don't fall back into boss-assistant dynamics. We stay equals. Equals, he agreed. Always equals. And if it's not working, if old patterns start showing up, we're honest about it instead of letting resentment build. Honest? He nodded. I can do honest. Then kiss me again, I said, smiling despite the tears in my eyes. Kiss me like you mean it. Like this is the beginning of something real instead of the end of something broken. He did, pulling me close and kissing me with 8 months of restraint finally breaking, and it felt like everything I'd been afraid to hope for, terrifying and perfect, and absolutely right. When we finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against mine. I love you, he said. I've loved you for so long I don't remember what it felt like not to love you. I love you too, I replied, finally letting myself say it without qualification or fear. Even when I was furious at you, even when I walked away, I never stopped loving you. So where do we go from here? Forward, I said simply. And together, as equals, figuring it out as we go. I can do that, Adrian said, kissing me again, softer this time, sweet instead of desperate, and sitting in that car overlooking the city where we'd both built our careers and broken each other's hearts and finally found our way back. I believed we actually could. Chapter 10. Epilogue. 1 year later. A year after that conversation in Adrian's car overlooking the city, I woke up in his bed with sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, and his arm draped across my waist in a way that still felt miraculous every single morning. You're awake, his voice rumbled against my shoulder, rough with sleep and unfairly attractive. How do you always know? I asked, settling back against his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong beneath my palm. Because your breathing changes, he said, pressing a kiss to my temple, and you always tense slightly, like you're surprised to find yourself here. I am surprised, I admitted, lacing my fingers through his. Pleasantly, but still surprised that this is real, that we actually made it work. We worked for it, Adrian corrected, and I heard the pride in his voice because he was right. This relationship wasn't accidental or easy. It was deliberate and hard-won and worth every difficult conversation we'd navigated. And we chose this every single day, even when it was uncomfortable. And it had been uncomfortable sometimes, moments when old patterns tried to resurface, when his need for control bumped against my need for autonomy, when my fear of being invisible again made me defensive. But we'd learned to recognize those moments and talk through them instead of letting them fester. We'd learned to be partners instead of boss and assistant, lovers instead of people playing roles, equals instead of the hierarchical mess we'd been trapped in before. What time is the thing today? I asked, knowing we had plans but too comfortable to actually check my phone. I'd brunch with Daniel and his fiancée at 11, Adrian said, and there was amusement in his tone because a year ago the idea of having a friendly meal with the man who'd shown interest in me would have been impossible for him. Then we're supposed to stop by the office for that charity event. Your office, I clarified, because I still worked at Sterling & Associates, and we'd agreed early on that maintaining separate professional lives was essential for our relationship staying healthy. My office, he agreed, kissing my shoulder in a way that made my skin warm, where my very capable assistant Marcus will have everything organized perfectly because I finally learned to hire people for competence instead of convenience. I turned in his arms to face him, studying the man who looked so different from the one I'd worked for 2 years ago, not in appearance but in presence, more open and less guarded, capable of vulnerability without seeing it as weakness. I'm proud of you, I said, tracing the line of his jaw. If for the work you've done, the person you've become, the way you keep choosing growth even when it's hard. I'm proud of you too, Adrian said, his hand finding my hip and resting there with casual intimacy that still made my breath catch. For building a career that's yours, for not letting me rush you, for being brave enough to give this a real chance despite everything I put you through. We kissed then, slow and deep and perfect, the kind of kiss that led to other things, and his hands started wandering with clear intention until I pulled back slightly, breathless and reluctant. We have brunch in 2 hours, I reminded him. And that's plenty of time, he said against my neck, and I felt him smile when I laughed. Shower first, I negotiated. Together. I can work with that, Adrian agreed, pulling me up with him, and we stumbled to his bathroom with the ease of people who'd learned each other's bodies and hearts over careful months. The shower was less efficient than it should have been, his hands on my skin making me forget about time and obligations. water cascading over us while we moved together in a rhythm we'd perfected through patience and trust and genuine desire that had nothing to do with forbidden attraction or power dynamics. This was different. This was choice and equality and love that felt clean instead of complicated. And when we finally emerged an hour later, we were late but happy in a way that made being late completely worthwhile. Brunch with Daniel was easier than I'd expected. His fiancée Sarah smart and funny and immediately making me feel welcome. And watching Adrian interact with them as actual friends instead of competition proved how much he'd changed, how much we'd both grown into people capable of healthy relationships. "You two are disgustingly happy," Daniel observed over mimosas, but he was smiling. "It's actually kind of inspiring." "We worked for it," I said, echoing Adrian's words from this morning. "It shows," Sarah said. "The way you look at each other. It's like you actually see each other instead of just performing relationship." Adrian's hand found mine under the table, squeezed gently, and I squeezed back because she was right. We did see each other, finally, actually, completely. The charity event at Murillo Enterprises felt strange, walking into the building where I'd spent 3 years being invisible. But everything looked different now because I was different, confident and self-assured and absolutely certain of my worth regardless of who noticed. Former colleagues greeted me with warmth, asking about my new job and genuinely seeming interested in my answers, and I realized they'd always been capable of seeing me. I just hadn't been willing to let myself be seen. Camilla was there, of course, because she'd transferred back from Singapore, and when our eyes met across the room, I felt nothing except mild pity for someone still trapped in patterns I'd escaped. She approached eventually, inevitable as a storm system, her smile sharp and calculating. "Estella," she said, looking me up and down, "I heard you and Adrian are together now. How convenient that worked out for you." "It wasn't convenient," I replied calmly, refusing to let her bait me into anger. "And it was difficult and painful, and required both of us to fundamentally change who we were. But yes, we're together, and yes, we're happy. We'll see how long that lasts," she said, cattiness barely disguised. "Adrian gets bored easily." "He used to," I agreed. "Hun, but people are capable of growth, Camilla. Something you might consider trying instead of staying bitter about relationships that were never going to work." I walked away before she could respond, found Adrian across the room talking to investors, and when he saw me, his entire face transformed with a smile that was only for me, and I knew with absolute certainty that Camilla was wrong. This was real. This was lasting. This was everything we'd both been too scared to reach for until we learned to be brave. That night, we went back to his apartment, ordered takeout, and ate it on the couch while watching terrible reality television, and the mundane domesticity of it felt more intimate than any grand gesture. "I have something for you," Adrian said during a commercial break, reaching for a small box on the coffee table. My heart stuttered because I knew what boxes that size usually meant, but when I opened it, I found not a ring, but a key. "I want you to move in," Adrian said, watching my face carefully. "Not because it's the next logical step, or because we should after a year, but because I want to wake up with you every morning and fall asleep with you every night and build a life together that's actually shared instead of separate." I looked at the key, at his face, at the life we'd built through patience and work and genuine love, and I felt tears burn behind my eyes because this was everything I'd been too scared to hope for. "Yes," I said simply. "Yes, I'll move in with you." Adrian kissed me then, deep and thorough and full of promise, and I kissed him back thinking about how far we'd come from that office where I'd been invisible, how much we'd both changed and grown and learned. We'd taken the long road to get here, the painful road, but it had made us people capable of actually loving each other instead of just wanting each other, partners instead of power struggle, equals instead of the broken dynamic we'd started with. And as we moved to his bedroom with intention and desire and absolute trust, I knew with certainty that this was just the beginning of something beautiful. We'd both been broken in different ways, both been scared of vulnerability, both been trapped in patterns that kept us from real intimacy, but we'd done the work, separately and together, and now we had something real, something lasting, something worth every difficult moment it had taken to get here. I loved Adrian Murillo not because he was powerful or successful or devastatingly attractive, though he was all those things, but because he'd chosen to grow, chosen to change, chosen to love me as an equal instead of a possession. And he loved me not because I'd made myself visible or confident or beautiful, though I was those things now too, but because I'd been brave enough to demand better, strong enough to walk away, and generous enough to give him a second chance when he'd proven he deserved it. This was our happy ending, hard-won and real and absolutely perfect.
1 year later, they wake up together, shower together, YouTube, safe, relax, and I can finally sleep in peace knowing those two are okay. Guys, we're done. Do you have any idea how much I suffered writing this story? Because I suffered, I started thinking, oh, This will be a cute little glow-up story with the boss drooling and somehow ended up doing therapy alongside Adrian. Seriously, my therapist asked if I was okay when I spent 40 straight minutes talking about emotionally unavailable men who use control as a defense mechanism. About Camila, look, I know you all hated her. I hated her too, but someone had to be the villain, and honestly, she represents every single woman who tears other women down to climb up. Camila is real, people. She exists at your job right now. Go ahead, check HR. She's there. And if she's not, I guarantee someone just popped into your head. See? Exactly. About Adrian hesitating. That scene where he hesitates when Camila asks if he wanted Estella before. I cried while writing it. Because that's IT, right? Silence hurts more than any words. The man just froze, like a fish out of water, not knowing what to say, and he destroyed Estella. Chef's kiss of emotional anguish. About Estella quitting. Loved IT so much. She didn't stay begging for attention. She didn't accept crumbs. She literally said, BYE, I'm going to be happy far away from you, and walked out like a queen. That's the energy I want for 2026, you know? About Adrian's accident. Okay, confession. I almost actually killed him. Like, in Chapter 7 I was seriously thinking, should I kill Adrian and have Estella end up with Daniel? But then I thought, no, Lena, you can't kill all your characters just because you're mad at the guy. So, he survived. You're welcome, Adrian. About Daniel. Daniel was too perfect, and that's exactly why he couldn't end up with Estella. Life isn't like that. Men who treat you well from the very beginning are rare, and we usually ignore them to obsess over someone with trauma. That's life. About Adrian going to therapy. Guys, I applauded when I wrote, I've been in therapy for 3 months. Finally, a male protagonist who admits he needs professional help instead of just making grand romantic gestures and thinking that fixes years of toxic behavior. About them ending up together. Look, I know some people wanted Estella to stay single and happy forever, but like, she loved the guy, and he did the work. 8 months of respecting boundaries, therapy, real change. That deserves a chance, right? If you agree with me, comment I do. Now. Fun facts about our story, because I know you love these. The name Estella was chosen on purpose. It means star in Latin. The irony of a woman named Star spending 3 years being invisible? Chef's kiss symbolism. Adrian Murillo was almost called Dominic Stone, but then I thought, way too dark romance cliché, and changed it. Murillo has that powerful old money family vibe. Adrian because, I don't know, it fit. The pool scene was inspired by real life. A friend told me her boss had a jealous meltdown when she laughed with another guy at a company event. He wasn't even interested in her. But male ego is a marvelous thing. Camila was based on 4 different people. I literally took the worst traits from the worst coworkers my friends and I have ever had and created the Frankenstein of corporate mean girls. The background comment was the most painful line to write. I rewrote that scene 7 times. It had to hurt just right. Not too obvious, but deep enough to cut. Adrian stayed silent for exactly 4 seconds. When Camilla asked if he wanted Estella before, I timed it. 4 seconds of silence in a conversation is an eternity. Try it with someone, you'll see. Daniel wasn't supposed to exist. Originally, Estella was going to transform and stay single. But then I thought, no. She needs options. Women deserve choices, not just to accept whatever shows up. Adrian's letter has exactly 347 words. I rewrote it 12 times until it was vulnerable in the right way. It couldn't be manipulative. It had to be honest. The car accident happens exactly 5 months later. That timing was intentional. 5 months is enough time for change to be real, but not so much that it feels like everything is magically resolved. Estella took pottery classes. That was an Easter egg for Ghost, yes. That movie. But also because she needed something that was only hers, nothing to do with Adrian or work. That's it. We're done. The next story is coming. See you there, darling.